He lost his autistic brother in a tragic fire. Then his dad brought home a new boy and started calling him by the same name. But a hidden insurance policy revealed a darker truth no one was prepared for. After my brother died in the fire, my father brought home a boy who looked just like him and started calling him by my brother's name. Marcus had been gone for 8 weeks. He was autistic and had wandered into the old barn behind our house while Dad was supposed to be watching him. I was in town with friends when it happened. When I got home, smoke was still rising from the charred remains of the structure. Dad stood in our driveway, ash covering his clothes, staring at nothing. Marcus had gotten trapped inside when the old wooden beams collapsed. The fire department said it started from faulty electrical wiring that Dad had been meaning to fix for months. After Marcus's funeral, Dad became a ghost. He sat in Marcus's room for hours, holding the weighted blanket Marcus used for comfort. Mom tried everything to reach him, but he barely ate or spoke. Then suddenly, like something had snapped into place, he became frantic about fostering. He spoke rapidly about giving another child a chance, about filling the empty space Marcus had left. Tyler arrived through an emergency placement program Dad had contacted. He was 7 years old, the same age Marcus had been, with similar dark hair and quiet demeanor. But Dad immediately gave him Marcus's clothes, Marcus's favorite sensory toys, and started slipping up with names. What hurt most was how Dad seemed relieved when Tyler responded to things Marcus never could. Dad praised Tyler constantly for making eye contact, for speaking in full sentences, for eating foods Marcus had refused. He showered Tyler with new electronics and games while ignoring my needs completely. He missed my track meets, forgot to sign permission slips, and brushed off my attempts to talk about Marcus. I started woodworking to cope, something Marcus always loved watching me do. I even built a bookshelf that won first place at the county fair, but Dad barely glanced at it. Mom noticed, offering gentle support, but we both felt helpless against Dad's fragile mental state. As Marcus's first death anniversary approached, I suggested visiting his grave, but Dad refused. He had planned a camping trip for that exact weekend, saying it would be Tyler's first real outdoor adventure. When I asked about Marcus, Dad cut me off. "There will be other weekends," he said dismissively. That broke something inside me. "You're acting like Marcus never existed," I told him. "You can't just replace him with Tyler." Dad's face went white, then red with anger. "Marcus was limited," he said through gritted teeth. "Tyler can actually have a future." Mom gasped from the doorway. I ran to my room, slamming the door behind me. Hours later, Mom knocked and sat on my bed. She looked exhausted. "Something is very wrong with your father," she whispered. "I've been ignoring it too long." We talked honestly about Dad's behavior for the first time. We agreed Tyler deserved better than being a replacement child. Mom mentioned she had been considering separation and custody arrangements. I felt guilty but also relieved that we weren't pretending anymore. When my grandparents visited the following week for the camping trip Dad had planned, Mom and I were ready. Everyone gathered awkwardly in our living room while Dad loaded camping gear. My chest felt tight as I watched him stuff Marcus's old sleeping bag into Tyler's backpack. Before Dad could lead Tyler outside, I spoke up clearly. "Dad has erased Marcus completely," I said. "Tyler deserves better than being Marcus's replacement." Dad's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Don't ruin this trip," he hissed. Mom stepped forward protectively as my grandparents began murmuring among themselves. "You called Marcus limited," I said, my voice shaking with grief. "You pretend he never existed and treat Tyler like some perfect substitute." My grandmother gasped quietly. My grandfather stared at Dad with disbelief. Dad's voice rose to a shout, his composure cracking completely. "Tyler is what Marcus wasn't," he yelled. "Marcus was a burden nobody wanted to deal with." The room fell silent. Tyler looked confused and scared. My grandmother immediately took Tyler's hand, comforting the frightened boy. Quietly, my grandparents gathered their things and left with Tyler, saying they needed time to think. That night, Dad packed his bags and left. In the following weeks, Tyler was placed with my aunt temporarily. Mom and I started therapy, grieving Marcus openly for the first time in months. We talked about his love for routine, his infectious laugh when something delighted him, and how much he had taught us about patience and unconditional love. After careful evaluation, Tyler returned to live with us. Mom began adoption proceedings, and we slowly rebuilt something resembling a family. We thought the worst was behind us. Then, 6 months later, Mom and I finally felt ready to sort through Dad's belongings from the storage unit he had rented. Among his papers, tucked behind old tax returns, I found a manila envelope. Inside was a life insurance policy on Marcus, worth $300,000, dated 6 months before his death. My hands trembled as I held the document. The policy was detailed and specific, with Marcus's full name clearly listed. The beneficiary was Dad alone, not both parents. The amount seemed enormous for a child's policy. Most disturbing was the timing, well before anyone had mentioned concerns about the old barn or its electrical problems. Mom was across the storage unit sorting Dad's tools when I called her over, my voice barely audible. She took the papers from me, her face paling as she read. She sank onto a box of Dad's old books, the policy trembling in her hands as she whispered about the amount and the date. My mind raced with terrible possibilities I didn't want to consider. The timing felt too convenient. Dad watching Marcus alone that day, the electrical fire in a barn Dad knew was dangerous, the money, the behavior afterward. The storage unit suddenly felt claustrophobic, boxes towering around us like walls. I could hear other people in adjacent units, their normal conversations a stark contrast to the horrible suspicions forming. I couldn't voice the question in my mind, but Mom looked up sharply, insisting Dad loved Marcus and would never hurt him. But her voice lacked conviction, and I could see the same doubt consuming her. "Your father loved Marcus," she said firmly, but her voice wavered. "He would never, he couldn't possibly." She couldn't finish the sentence. We spent the next week in a fog of suspicion and dread. Mom contacted a lawyer who specialized in insurance fraud, speaking quietly while I pretended not to listen. The lawyer, Mrs. Chen, came to our house one evening after Tyler was asleep. She reviewed the policy carefully at our kitchen table, her expression serious as she explained that the amount was unusually high for a child's policy, particularly for a child with special needs who would typically be difficult to insure for such a sum. "The timing raises red flags," she admitted reluctantly, removing her glasses to clean them nervously. Mom asked about investigating further, and Mrs. Chen explained the process would be complicated and potentially traumatic. She suggested starting by finding Dad and asking him directly about the policy before involving authorities. Sleep became impossible. I was haunted by images of Dad watching Marcus enter that barn, doing nothing to stop him or fix the dangerous wiring. The thought made me physically sick. I found myself avoiding the backyard, unable to look at the blackened foundation where the barn had stood. Nightmares plagued me, visions of Marcus calling for help while flames surrounded him and Dad stood watching. I would wake gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the smell of smoke filling my nostrils. During the day, I moved through school in a daze, unable to focus on anything. The barn's remains, which had been cleared but not rebuilt, took on a sinister quality in my imagination. I began taking the long way to the mailbox to avoid seeing the empty space where it had stood. The sound of crackling wood in our fireplace made my heart race with anxiety. Then one evening, Mom came into my room where I was working on a wooden jewelry box, Tyler's birthday gift. She told me simply that she had found Dad. He was living in a small apartment across the state, working at a lumber yard and keeping to himself. She had hired a private investigator, a decision she made without telling me to spare me stress. The investigator found Dad within days, reporting that he seemed to be living quietly, going only between work and home, occasionally shopping, but otherwise isolated. Mom thought we should confront him together, but I wasn't sure I wanted to see him again. Still, I needed answers more than comfort, so I agreed. The drive was tense, silence filling the car like a physical presence. I clutched the insurance policy in my backpack, the manila envelope now worn from handling. Dad's apartment was in a rundown complex, gray buildings with small windows and a parking lot full of potholes. It looked temporary and sad, nothing like the home he had helped create for our family. When we pulled up, my stomach twisted into knots. He answered the door looking smaller than I remembered. His hair was longer and unkempt, his face thinner, with new lines around his eyes. The man who answered was a diminished version of my father. He had lost weight, his clothes hanging loosely, but it was the change in his eyes that shocked me most. They seemed empty, lacking the intensity that had always characterized him. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then he stepped back, gesturing us inside without a word. His apartment was small but clean. I noticed immediately there were no photos anywhere, no personal touches that connected him to our family or his past. The living room contained only basics: a worn couch, a coffee table, a lamp, and a small television. The kitchen was similarly sparse with bare counters and a small table that looked unused. He asked quietly about Tyler, and Mom replied carefully that he was doing well and staying with Mrs. Rodriguez next door. Dad nodded, his eyes darting nervously between us before asking why we had come. I couldn't hold back anymore. I pulled out the insurance policy and placed it on his coffee table. The manila envelope made a soft sound as it hit the glass surface. Dad's eyes fixed on it immediately, recognition flashing across his face. He didn't reach for it, just stared as if it might disappear. His face changed as he recognized the document, but not with the guilt I expected. Instead, I saw pain and confusion as he stated flatly what he thought we were thinking. "You think I killed my own son," he said, his voice hollow. "You think I let Marcus die for money." The bluntness of his statement hung between us. Mom shifted uncomfortably beside me, but I held his gaze steadily. When I asked if he had, my voice cracking with emotion, Dad covered his face with his hands. The question seemed to physically hurt him. His shoulders hunched forward as if absorbing a blow. For several long moments, he remained that way, his breathing audible in the quiet apartment. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red but dry, as if he had already cried all his tears. He explained that he took out the policy because he was terrified something would happen to Marcus. "The barn was old and dangerous," Dad said, his voice steadier now. "I knew the wiring was bad, that Marcus liked to explore places he shouldn't. I was always worried he would get hurt, and I wanted to make sure we could afford whatever care he might need if something happened. I was scared," he continued, twisting his hands. "I researched the costs of burn units, specialized care, long-term rehabilitation. The numbers were staggering. When Mom asked why he never told her about the policy, Dad admitted he was handling so many of Marcus's therapies and safety concerns that he didn't want to add another worry. After Marcus died, the insurance company processed the claim automatically," he explained. "The money went into a separate account where it sat untouched. I couldn't use it," he said, his voice breaking. "Every time I saw that balance, I felt sick. It was supposed to protect Marcus, not compensate for losing him. When I asked why he left us, he shook his head, asking how he could face us after what he said about Marcus and how he treated Tyler. I was broken," he whispered. "After Marcus died, something in me shattered. I couldn't process the loss, couldn't accept it. When Tyler came, I thought I could start over, pretend the pain wasn't there. But I ended up hurting everyone and dishonoring Marcus's memory. He told us he had been seeing a therapist, trying to understand his behavior. My therapist says I had a complete psychological break," he explained. "The grief was so overwhelming that my mind created this fantasy where Marcus's autism had been the problem and Tyler was the solution. It wasn't true. Marcus was perfect exactly as he was. Something still felt wrong. I pressed him about that day, about how Marcus had gotten into the barn. Dad's face crumpled as he explained he had been on the phone with his brother. Uncle Pete called about some work emergency," Dad recalled, his forehead creasing with effort. "Some crisis with a client that couldn't wait. I told him I needed to get back to Marcus, but he kept finding new problems to discuss, new reasons to keep me talking. When I realized how long I had been on the phone, it was too late. I saw smoke coming from the barn and found Marcus collapsed inside from the smoke." Dad's voice broke as he continued. "I pulled him out, tried CPR, screamed for help. The fire department said he probably died from smoke inhalation before the flames reached him. I tried so hard to save him." Mom and I exchanged looks as Dad mentioned Uncle Pete had been at our house that day, arriving early for dinner. He was the one who called 911 while Dad was trying to revive Marcus. In my memory of that terrible day, Uncle Pete had arrived after the fire trucks, but Dad was saying he had been there already. When Mom asked if Pete was there that day, Dad nodded, explaining that he arrived early for dinner and made the emergency call while Dad was doing CPR. "Pete was already at the house when it happened," Dad confirmed, looking confused by our reaction. A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I asked if Uncle Pete knew about the insurance policy. Dad looked up sharply, telling us that Pete was the one who suggested it. "Pete works in construction insurance," Dad said slowly, realization dawning. "He's the one who told me about policies for high-risk situations. He helped me fill out the paperwork." The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Uncle Pete arriving early, the convenient work emergency keeping Dad on the phone, and later, he was the one who had recommended the foster agency that brought Tyler. Pete would have known about the barn's condition from his construction work. "He had done electrical work on our property before," Mom said, her voice growing stronger as connections formed. "He knew exactly how dangerous that wiring was. If Pete had seen Marcus heading toward the barn, why hadn't he stopped him? Why make a work call that would keep Dad distracted?" Dad stood up abruptly, saying we needed to confront Pete immediately. Mom grabbed his arm, telling us there was something else. "Pete had been calling," she said, her voice trembling. "At first checking on Dad, but lately asking about the insurance money, whether Dad had received it, what he planned to do with it. Pete had been pressuring Dad about the money, claiming he deserved a cut for helping set up the policy and for his emotional support afterward. My blood ran cold as I remembered Pete had been spending time with Tyler, taking him to baseball games and offering to babysit. Since Tyler had come to live with us, Uncle Pete had been unusually involved, volunteering to take Tyler for weekend activities, often keeping him overnight. Mom had been grateful for the help, but now those offers seemed sinister. Was Pete using Tyler to maintain a connection to our family while pressuring Dad about the money? I told him we needed to get home immediately. The drive back was tense, with Dad sitting silently in the back seat, staring out the window. Mom drove quickly, taking corners sharply as Dad gave occasional directions. None of us spoke about what we feared we might find. When we pulled into our driveway, Mrs. Rodriguez was outside looking worried. She told us that Dad's brother had picked up Tyler about an hour ago, claiming we had asked him to take Tyler to a baseball game. Mrs. Rodriguez seemed troubled as she explained that Pete had been in a hurry, barely giving Tyler time to grab his glove. Something about Pete's manner had struck her as odd, but she had no reason to question a relative Tyler knew well. Dad's face went white as he told her we hadn't asked anyone to take Tyler. We called the police immediately. The officer who responded took our concerns seriously, especially after Dad showed him the text messages from Pete about the insurance money. These messages, increasingly demanding and threatening, provided evidence of motive for taking Tyler without permission. They put out an alert for Pete's truck and told us to stay by the phone. The waiting was unbearable. Dad paced the living room, looking at Tyler's drawings on the refrigerator, repeatedly apologizing for everything. Hours stretched endlessly as we waited for news. Mom made coffee that grew cold. Dad moved restlessly, straightening Tyler's books, adjusting picture frames. Dad's apologies became constant background noise. He was sorry for how he had treated me, sorry for what he said about Marcus, sorry for abandoning us when we needed him. I didn't know if I could forgive him yet, but watching him now, I could see he truly loved Marcus, and Tyler too. The police called 4 hours later with news that they had found Pete and Tyler at a motel 2 counties over. Pete was being arrested, and Tyler was safe and coming home. Relief washed over us like a physical wave. Dad collapsed into a chair, Mom burst into tears, and I felt lightheaded with the release of tension. When Tyler came through the door with a police officer, Dad hung back uncertainly, but Tyler saw him and reached out, calling him Daddy in his small voice. Tyler looked confused but unhurt, his baseball glove still clutched in his hand. Despite the months of separation and trauma, Tyler still recognized Dad as his father figure. Dad looked at Mom, silently asking permission. She nodded slightly, a gesture of reconciliation. As Dad held Tyler close, I thought about Marcus, about how he would want us to move forward together, not forgetting him, but finding a way to be a family that honored his memory. The next few weeks were difficult, but healing. Uncle Pete confessed to seeing Marcus heading toward the barn and deliberately doing nothing. He admitted to making the work call to keep Dad distracted, revealing that the insurance money had been his plan from the beginning. The police investigation revealed the full extent of Pete's manipulation. He had known about the dangerous wiring, had suggested the insurance policy, and had orchestrated events that day. Later, he positioned himself to benefit from our family's trauma. He now faced serious criminal charges. Dad moved back in tentatively, taking the guest room. He and Mom weren't back together romantically, but they were communicating honestly for the first time in years. Their relationship had become something new, not husband and wife anymore, but co-parents united in protecting Tyler and honoring Marcus's memory. We visited Marcus's grave together as a family. Dad placed a small wooden car on the headstone, one I had made specially for Marcus, with his favorite blue paint. The cemetery was peaceful that day, with sunlight filtering through oak trees and birds singing overhead. Dad knelt by the headstone, tracing Marcus's name with his fingers. He whispered an apology for trying to replace him, acknowledging that Marcus deserved better. "I'm so sorry, my sweet boy," he said softly, tears streaming down his face. "I tried to escape the pain by finding a substitute, but you deserve to be remembered for exactly who you were." Tyler came too, placing a flower next to my wooden car, saying it was for Marcus in heaven. "Marcus is my brother too?" he asked, looking up with wide eyes. "Yes," I told him, kneeling down. "Marcus is your brother too, and he would have loved you very much." I watched my broken family standing together and felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Not that things would return to how they were, that was impossible, but that we could build something meaningful from the pieces. That night, I finished the jewelry box I had been making for Tyler. I carved a small inscription inside: "For Tyler, with love from your family, including Marcus." The box was my most detailed work yet, made from oak with careful inlay patterns Tyler would appreciate. Looking at a photo of Marcus on my dresser, taken at his 6th birthday where he was grinning at the camera with chocolate frosting on his nose, I made a silent promise to live with the same joy and curiosity he had shown every day. That, I decided, would be Marcus's true legacy. Not tragedy or loss, but the reminder to embrace life fully and love openly even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts.